Today, we're putting Ted Lasso and the entire AFC Richmond squad into Football Manager 2023. We're going to see if Ted Lasso can keep a squad expected to fight bravely against relegation in the English Premier Division. But with nothing in the trophy cabinet and a board with very few expectations, we're going to see how Ted Lasso would play out in Football Manager. Welcome back to the Filipino FM channel, your home for Filipino football content. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. As I mentioned, we have put AFC Richmond into Football Manager 2023, and we're going to see how Ted Lasso and the squad do for about 5 seasons. So I've included the AFC Richmond squad here with all of the players from the TV show, including the main cast and some of the background characters. I'll go through each of the characters and we'll talk about how I set up the database in this video, and then in future videos we'll see how they do each season. We might go through season 1 this episode, just depending on how long the video is, but if the video is too long, we'll kind of go season by season to see how the AFC Richmond squad is doing and to catch up with them then. But to start off, we have Ted Lasso here. I have made him the assistant manager, but I'll give him all of the managerial duties and he'll be the acting manager once I go on holiday. I just had to make myself the manager to be able to set up the database. But I feel that these attributes are fairly realistic for Ted Lasso. Attacking, defending, fitness, and technical attributes are all 1 for coaching. I did give him 10 for tactical because we saw in one of the recent episodes. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen Ted Lasso. But when he goes through total football, we start to see some of that tactical acumen. So I wanted to reflect a little bit of that tactical acumen in his attributes. That being said, we've given him really high mentals, really high working with youngsters, and really high judging staff ability, because I think that's reflected throughout the show. And we've made him American and his approximate age. So this is a pretty accurate reflection, I think, of what Ted Lasso looks like in the show. And we'll see how he's able to coach the squad and lead the squad, and whether he can keep them up in the English Premier Division. I've also added his coaching staff to the database. So here we have Nathan Shelley prior to him moving to West Ham with some pretty good coaching attributes. We see him as kind of a wonder kid in the show. So I wanted that to be reflected in his attributes. We've also added in Coach Beard with some pretty solid attributes overall, but a little bit of a step down from what we saw with Nate Shelley. I've also added in Will the Kitman, who they gave a very interesting hairdo to in the game. We don't really see him doing a whole lot, so I just made him a very average coach. I don't know how much he'll affect the game, but I wanted to add him in regardless. And finally, we have Higgins, who we've also added into the game as our director of football, just like he is in AFC Richmond in the show. That being said, a little bit less show accurate. Couldn't figure out in the Creative Club how to make a new owner. So we do have Rebecca as our technical director and part of the backroom staff. I couldn't figure out how to make her the owner, unfortunately, but I still wanted her in this database. So this was the best I could do given the circumstances. She's the technical director and she is working closely with Higgins in our database. Moving into our playing squad, this is what the playing squad looks like. All of the ratings are, I think, pretty high. They are done by Nate Shelley, I believe, is who we have doing the ratings at the moment. They are a little bit high. I do find that later on into the save, when we get there, they start to narrow out. But let's go through the players one by one so that you can see what they look like. Starting off with Zava, we have made him the best player in this save. I felt that these were the attributes that reflected him pretty well. To be honest, they're very similar to Zlatan Ibrahimovic's attributes, with just some better physicals, because in the show, we do see him being kind of a physical specimen. So I did want that reflected in his attributes. As we can see with the player traits, we see some of the things that I believe are reflected in the show. He shoots with power, he argues with officials, he attempts overhead kicks, and he tries tricks. He hits free kicks with power. So some of these are similar to Zlatan, but some of these are similar in the show, such as the attempting overhead kicks, which I believe was one of the highlights in the show as well. Now, something that happened in the show, and again, spoiler alert if you haven't seen Ted Lasso and season 3, but in the show, he leaves sometime in January. He essentially retires. Now, using the in game editor, I couldn't figure out how to make him retire halfway this season. So, the best that I could do was have him leaving on a free transfer on January 1st. So, AFC Richmond will have Zava for about half the season, maybe a little bit less because of the World Cup. And then after that, Zava will be leaving the club. Next up, we have Jamie Tart, who we've made a pretty solid player in the game. Good dribbling, good finishing, good free kick taking, and overall, a very, very good player. So we're going to see how he develops. We've also given him some room to go. So even though he's a good player now, he could, in theory, become a world-class striker in the game. Overall, once Sava leaves, Jamie Tart will be the best player on AFC Richmond. We also have Sam Obisanya, who can play all along the right side. In season 1, he's mentioned as playing in defense, but also being able to play into the midfield after Ted Lasso pushes him up. So I wanted that reflected in the game. He's natural in both the right back and right mid positions. And overall, he is a pretty good player, physically, mentally, technically, pretty solid Premier Division player. And not to forget, our football is life, our favorite Dani Rojas, also a very good striker in the game, can play all across the front line, and overall, very similar but a little bit of a downgrade from Jamie Tart. We've also included Isaac McAdoo, who has a physical and aggressive specimen, and overall a really good defender. In FIFA, so how I did some of these players and looked at their attributes is I did look at their official ratings in FIFA because that was about as close as I could get to an official rating. And they really, really liked Isaac McAdoo, so that is reflected in his attributes here. He is probably going to be the stalwart of the back four for AFC Richmond. Other players in the save include Colin Hughes, Jan Moss, Richard Montlar, and our favorite goalkeeper, Thierry Zero, or as we have him in the game, Van Damme. But finally, we could not forget one of our favorite characters in the show, Roy Kent, who we have included as a player in the game as opposed to a coach. I have kind of set him up with the hope that he'll retire with not really good natural fitness and some really low physical ratings. But we've given him really great mental stats, some pretty good technical stats, but most importantly, 20 for leadership, 20 for determination, 20 for bravery, and of course, 20 for aggression. All of these players are on decently long contracts, at least 3 years, except for Zava. So hopefully they will stay with the club and we can see Ted Lasso try and coach these players to staying in the Premier Division and maybe even making it all the way to the top. Overall, for season 1, the expectations from the board are pretty low. It's just to fight bravely against relegation, be competitive in the FA Cup, and be competitive in the Caribou Cup, which are pretty much the lowest expectations that you can have. So overall, Ted Lasso should be able to hit these relegations, and even if the team is relegated, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for him. So I think for this episode, we're just going to fast forward one season into the future. We'll look how they're doing in season 1, and we'll save future seasons for future episodes if that's something you all would be interested in. So I'm going to hit forward to June 2023, and we're going to catch up with Ted Lasso and the rest of the AFC Richmond squad there. All right, we are 1 year into the future with the AFC Richmond squad, and we're going to see what they've been up to. Good news. The AFC Richmond squad avoided relegation, finishing 15th in the Premier Division, hitting that 40-point mark. So Ted Lasso was able to keep Richmond up in season 1. Looking through their schedule, they had a pretty decent start to the season, winning and drawing and losing a few games. However, it was the back half of the season where it looks like they had a pretty tough time, only winning 3 games in essentially 4 months to end the season. It was enough to keep them up, but overall, there's not a whole lot of momentum going into season 2, so hopefully Ted Lasso and the rest of the squad will be able to generate some momentum going into next season. As far as the FA Cup is concerned, they did lose in the 4th round with a mauling to Liverpool, 5-1, and they did lose 3-0 in the Carabao Cup quarterfinal. So, still no trophies for Ted Lasso and the AFC Richmond squad. Looking at the transfers over the course of the year, it does look like Higgins and Rebecca were busy in the transfer market. Interestingly, they signed Donny van de Beek and Marcos Alonso for a combined £25.5 million. However, sadly, we did lose Isaac McAdoo to Arsenal for a cool £22 million. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like Isaac McAdoo had a very good season. He did play in 35 matches, but only had a 6.55 average rating, so that might explain why they decided to sell him to Arsenal. Interestingly, it looks like once Zava left AFC Richmond, again, we didn't have him retiring because I didn't know how to make that in the game. So he left on a free transfer and ended up at PSG, which is a very similar route actually to what Zlatan did in real life. But overall, it looks like he's doing pretty well at PSG. He already has 9 goals in 14 matches and a whopping 7.5 rating. He's doing a little bit better at PSG than he did at Richmond, only 6 goals in 16 matches, but still a very high 7.41 rating. So overall, Sava's having a very good season. Looking at some of the other players in the AFC Richmond squad, Jamie Tart had a pretty good season, only a 6.94 average rating, but he did get 14 goals in 37 appearances, so not too bad. Dani Rojas also hit double figures in goals for the season, with 10 goals in 32 appearances. Sam Obisanya appeared in 35 matches and had a solid 6.77 rating. Roy Kent only appeared in 23 matches with just a 6.61 rating. Surprisingly, in this save, he hasn't retired yet, but I do wonder if his low physicals are catching up with him. And other players, such as Colin Hughes, had a goal, 5 assists, and a 6.64 rating. Jan Maas had a 6.56 average rating, but did get his head onto 2 goals. And finally, our favorite Canadian goalkeeper, Van Dam, had 35 appearances, but he did concede 68 goals and averaged about a 6.7 average rating. Unfortunately, this wasn't good enough for any of our AFC Richmond players to get in the awards categories, which were essentially dominated by Erling Haaland, who had a whopping 48 goals to finish as the top goal scorer. He was also the Players' Player of the Year, nominated in the Team of the Year with the rest of the Man City and Liverpool squads. He was also the Young Player of the Year and was ultimately the Footballer of the Year as well. So overall, pretty dominant from Holland, but not enough for Jamie Tart, Obisanya, Zava, or any of these other players to get involved in any of these awards. And going into season 2, it does look like we have some new objectives. They are expected to finish mid-table in the Premier Division, so that is a little bit higher than what we were expecting. And interestingly, it looks like they're building a new stadium away from Nelson Road. So we do have Nelson Road in the game as a 25,000-seater stadium, very similar to Crystal Palace's stadium. But with a new stadium on the way, this may potentially bring in a higher reputation, new funds, and potentially help Ted Lasso and this AFC Richmond squad have a title. So I think we'll leave that there for this episode. We'll have how AFC Richmond did in future seasons coming up soon. I think we'll do maybe seasons 2 and 3 next time, and we'll see how AFC Richmond is getting on then. Thank you for watching this video, and we'll be back with more Football Manager content soon. Bye.